Hi, I'm Lisa K. Donner, along with Andrew Moran, Sarah Cowgill, Dave Patterson, Scott Cosenza, and Graham Noble. For the year-end special, we've added a twist. For today only, we shall be called the Conservative Six, Liberty Nation's online TV news program. What a long, strange, tripping kind of year it's been. The coverage provided by Liberty Nation News tells the tale. COVID was an early attention getter, followed by high-profile trials. Immigration made the news until I guess it wasn't flattering to the vice president, and the state of Virginia finally glowed bright red, which I am happy to say since I live in Virginia. But the most important story of the year has been our withdrawal from Afghanistan. That event sparked an immediate takeover by the Taliban and all of its inglorious collateral damage. Without further ado, the correspondent who led nearly every media outlet in the coverage of the Afghanistan debacle, David Patterson, is here with us today. Dave was also talking about the buildup on the Ukraine-Russian border long before the big boys. He may scare the bejesus out of us, but he does know his stuff. Welcome to the panel, Dave. Let her rip.
Thank you, Lisa. You know, the Biden administration and its foreign policy is such a rich orchard of gaffes for grabbing low-hanging fruit that, well, let's talk about Afghanistan and the mess the entire national security leadership made of the retreat. And it was a retreat. There's no question about that. And it's the only word to describe the debacle. The disaster started actually in April when Biden thought he'd be politically cute and make September 11th the date Americans would be out of Afghanistan. Well, I guess cooler heads prevailed in the administration, because when the political cuteness gag was pointed out to the administration, Biden's team immediately landed on August 31st, which was put immediately into concrete. But why that date? You have to ask yourself. And why not the end of the calendar year? There is no reason for that date. But nonetheless, that's where the debacle actually started. And after that, you had the failure of the government, or the US government, to provide adequate air support for the Afghan security forces, the abandonment of Bagram Air Base, which would have been useful in the withdrawal. And then one of the things that gets very little in the way of coverage was when the Taliban actually asked the United States to provide security within Kabul, and they asked General McKenzie if he would do that. They were having a terrible time with lawlessness inside Kabul and asked the United States to provide policing, and McKenzie declined. Imagine, that would have expanded the security ring around the Kabul airport. And we would maybe not have had the killing of the 13 American soldiers and Marines and the one naval member. And then, of course, you know, Liberty Nation wrote about it extensively, the hasty drone strike that killed 10 civilians. And, you know, and no one is accountable for that. The next subject, I think, is Ukraine, you know, and it's an entirely different kettle of fish, of course. But as you pointed out, the Liberty Nation has been following this for almost a year now, and the buildup of Russian combat forces on the eastern Ukraine border. And with the exception of periodic skirmishes between Russian-backed separatists and the Ukraine military, it's been reasonably calm, except for the Russian maneuvers and posturing on the border. But from a global geopolitical perspective, I think that Putin wants to establish and preserve respect as a legitimate great power peer. And Putin's a very clever guy. You got to give it to him. He put those troops in position to establish a cause for negotiating for what he wants. The Kremlin wants written assurances from the United States and NATO that Ukraine will not be allowed to join NATO. Well, of course, that's a non-starter. And the United States told him it was a non-starter from the very beginning. He also wants NATO and US to guarantee that they won't station troops in the Ukraine. Well, nobody's going to agree to that. And then Moscow wants guarantees. Now, this is a clever one, that no NATO or US naval vessels will operate close enough to Russia to be a threat. Well, that pretty much rules out the Black Sea, where we have operations going on routinely. But you take these two events, these two worldwide events, and you put them in context, and you look at them together. It's a wonder anyone respects or admires the United States, and that's unfortunate.
Yeah. Well, Graham, you mentioned earlier that I guess in a previous segment, and folks, if you haven't seen it, you have to watch them all. That you're former military, but I can't let this opportunity go by, because we were both working the weekend of that infamous drone strike, and we both felt in our bones that it was just one of those, okay, let's show strength, get me anybody to kill. It felt off.
Yes, it did. I remember that well, and I remember the two of us discussing the fact before the drone strike happened. The two of us discussed the idea that at some point after that first attack, after that first bombing, that at some point the administration was going to come out and say, "Well, we just launched a drone strike and we took out the people responsible." And of course, who they took out to this day, we don't know for sure. They ended up saying that they took out a planner, an ISIS planner and facilitator, whatever that means. I understand what those labels were supposed to mean, but they could have taken out, some poor shepherd somewhere, quite frankly, a goat herder. We have no idea. And I think that particular incident really, it set the tone for this completely irresponsible way in which this whole withdrawal was conducted. And of course, I don't have to go into the details because Dave has covered this all for Liberty Nation very well. But the entire thing, from the point of view of myself, a veteran, it was a complete unmitigated disaster, and there was no excuse for any of it. People should be appalled.
So in summation, what Dave was saying and what Graham was saying, and this is just my little pea brain, this administration is a disaster. It's incompetent when it comes to national security issues in our military.
Well,
right?
Yeah. And I do think we have some indication that ended up being a water carrier and a bunch of kids, or
I believe it was an NGO worker,
right.
And he basically also, 10 people were killed. That fellow plus others, and 7 of them were children. And
and there were actually 2 separate strikes here. There was an initial drone strike, which was actually where they took out a car traveling near the Pakistani border, and that's the one where they tried to say, "Well, we killed ISIS planners," and that's the one where to this day, we don't really know who they killed. And then there was that second strike actually in Kabul, which was the tragic one, which killed a non-governmental organization worker who was just delivering water, and also killed, I guess, a great many members of his family, most of them children.
Right. Well, politically speaking, it's interesting because Dave has a series coming out. You really should hit libertynation.com, and he's looking into, who's our biggest threat, Russia or China. But Andrew, I wanted to talk about that with you because on the economic front, there's a lot of threat from China.
Yeah, there is, but it's not always as China. This is more of a regional approach. I mentioned in a previous segment about how a lot of these regional countries, they're engaged in a de-dollarization campaign. They're trying to get off the dollar. So, for instance, Russia, they completely prohibited any use of dollars at Russian seaports. You also converse in rubles now. You also have the currency swap agreements between China and Russia that keeps getting extended and worth billions of dollars in transactions. But the BRICS are also part of this too. There's a lot of these BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, they want to, get off the dollar. They want to stop relying so much on the United States dollar. And Iran too. Iran is a perfect example of how they want all the other countries to stop using the dollar so they can completely divert away from or avert to these economic sanctions that are applied on their country and, become another economic player thanks to their vast crude oil reserves. And if I may ask Dave one question, I remember reading as early as 2018 that a lot of these military brass, they warned that a military victory can never be achieved in Afghanistan. So my question is, could the U.S. have ever left Afghanistan without similar chaos unfolding? Let's say, Biden kept the May deadline. Wouldn't this still have happened?
I think that if you had kept the May deadline, it probably would have been worse because you would have had less time to prepare. But to your point, I think that what is important when we ever enter into any sort of military action, you have to have a clear, understandable objective. We never have had that in Afghanistan. So you never knew when it was over because the goalposts kept being moved every time you thought about it. And the idea that you must know what winning looks like. And people need to understand what it looks like. You never put a date certain when you'll be leaving because people will wait you out. You must have a clear objective for what winning looks like and what it means.
I'll finish up by saying the stories from active servicemen and women were frankly heartbreaking for me and for so many red-blooded Americans, from our canine soldiers left in crates at the airport. That was head spinning. The world watched as the U.S. left people behind. Gold Star moms fumed publicly. One mother called the president of the United States feckless. Former military leaders demanded an accounting and received nothing but lip service. How can Joe Biden justify what has been done to our people and our country and our reputation? I don't know, folks. We're at a crossroads. Thanks so much for tuning in. Keep the faith. That's it for our Conservative 5 panel today. Check out our other C5 shows and segments on your favorite video platform, YouTube, Vimeo, Rumble. We're on them all. As well, Liberty Nation has its own Roku channel where you can see all of our TV productions. Thanks so much for tuning in. And remember, surf on over to libertynation.com. Sign up for our new member zone, just $29.99 for a year. Special thanks to our fantastic editor and post coordinator, Frank DiOrio, and our amazing executive producer, Sarah Cowgill. I'm Lisa K. Donner, editor-in-chief. Thanks for joining us today. This has been a production of libertynation.com, where truth is making a comeback.